Ahead and get started. And are we live on Facebook?
It's recording and I'm in the process of pushing all the
Oh,
buttons that Facebook makes me
oh,
push. Give me like 30 more seconds.
okay, sure. Okay. Hello, good evening. We all have a social responsibility to confront power head on, to make thoughtful decisions and keep in the integrity of the collective good, and to protect the overall well-being of our community. Our well-being in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County is reflected in the state of our most vulnerable neighborhoods, the conditions of our schools, and the type of investment we make in our children, our Black children, our brown children, and our white children. Historically, we have done a great job ensuring our white children receive the good investment because we centered a lot of our decision making around what is best for our white children. At times, this was not intentionally done to the detriment of other children. Nevertheless, it is always done to the detriment of Black and Indigenous children of color. Despite centering white children and, quite frankly, whiteness as a superior basis for decision making, Black and Indigenous children of color continue to be resilient. They show up in a historically oppressive system with smiling faces on Zoom, eager to see their teachers and their friends as they work to put their best little feet forward. Even as we continue to enroll Black children in a system that only centers white children and white families, Black boys and girls beat all odds and become proud Black men and women. And generation after generation, we Black people continue to lead the fight to realize the American project called democracy. And this is in the face of oppression and despite political violence. Political violence, such as what we're facing now throughout our country and on every level of government, and more specifically tonight, the political violence within our school system continues. Let me be clear, equity is under assault. And if we're ever going to end the violence and move away from the shame and the lack of human and spiritual consciousness called white supremacy that plagues our education system, we're going to do it by leveling the playing field and centering the needs of children who have historically been harmed and neglected due to racist policies. We can no longer fight for equity with just our lips. We must use our hearts, our hands, and our minds. We cannot be idle during moments of critical decision making and watch to see what happens. We must respond to protect our progress and prevent decisions that will take us backwards. We must work to dismantle racist policies such as school choice, as well as ending the whitewashing of history. Yes, we must stop preventing children from having access to American heroes who look like themselves. And we must teach all children, including our white children, that it was the ingenuity of Africans and the strength of not only their bodies, but their minds that built this country for free. And often Blackness that pays the cost in our government to keep it together. And we must enact policies and provide the type of funding that produces access to high quality pre-K, highly gifted and talented instruction, and resources that educate the whole child in their classrooms, their communities, and their homes. Thankfully, many of you joining us this evening have heard the clarion call and you are ready to take action. Tonight is about resistance, resilience, repair, and restoration. Reimagine advocacy, and locate yourself in the way you make decisions in tonight's conversation. Move beyond the limits of fear, and may we all think bigger, better, greater for every child. Let us all work to give ourselves to our thoughts and a new way of being in community that's beyond the construct of race. Yet, we must all understand that living beyond the construct of race first requires all of us to become conscious of the ways racial violence is embedded in every aspect of our society, including the ways we educate and develop our youngest and most precious souls. Welcome to Equity is Under Assault, presented by Action for Equity. My name is Kelly Easton. I am the Executive Director of Action for Equity, and we are an intentional Black-led, multiracial coalition fighting to achieve a community culture where equity and education proudly prevails. And next, we'll hear from the President of the Forsyth County Association of Educators, Val Young.
Thank you, Kelly. This is a letter written to our board. First, FCAE would like to say that we know this is a very difficult time for us all, but we are willing to be solution minded. It has been our experience that you, as the board, have valued our concerns and opinions. During this past year, our system under Dr. Harrison's leadership has begun a plan for a new Ashley Elementary School land purchase, secured a choice neighborhood grant, created an area support plan, hired an equity director, created an equity committee, created an equity policy, developed a strategic plan for Winston-Salem Forsyth County School System, created a CARES team, established 40 remote learning centers, purchased new textbooks with the funding from Project Impact and Winston-Salem Foundation, helped pass the quarter of a cent tax for teacher supplement, provided a bonus for classified staff. Much work has been done, but much more work will need to be done. We know that Winston-Salem Forsyth County School System now has an executive cabinet that is, that is qualified and ready to move forward. Let's keep moving forward. No steps back. The Forsyth County Association of Educators asks that you look within this in the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Executive Cabinet to find our interim superintendent. We have a qualified second in command with Deputy Superintendent Trish McManus, who has been with us since December. She has been a part of this forward movement. It seems that she is the obvious choice for interim superintendent. As part of the executive cabinet, she should be able to count on the rest of the executive cabinet to support her as she steers our ship forward. Our next concern is filling the vacancy in our superintendent's position. We should not spend any more money on recruiting until we review the data from the last superintendent search. The last search must have some top candidates who are available for consideration in filling this position. This is where we should start. FCAE is willing to help in any way we can. Thank you for always listening to our concerns as we work to make a better school system for our students, parents, and staff. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you again, Val Young, President of FCAE.
Wonderful. Thank you, Val. And next, we're going to receive a presentation from Eunice Campbell, who is the Education Committee Chair for the NAACP, the Winston-Salem branch, as well as Carolyn Highsmith, who is the President for the Coalition for Equity in Public Education.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eunice Campbell, and I am the chair of the Education Committee for the NAACP local branch here in Winston-Salem. I have been tasked to share a little history of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School System. And upon doing a lot of research, especially over the last couple of years, several years being involved, that would take more than just a couple of minutes. But Carolyn and I have tried to put into a PowerPoint presentation, basically the last 20 years and exactly what has been going on. So you have some type of timeline and you will understand the current environment that is present in our district. From what the timeline we chose was 1994 to 2020. That's 26 years. And it shows how the Winston-Salem schools continue to operate on what is considered a Jim Crow system by design of racial and economic resegregation, named school choice is one of our biggest examples of that happening. The architect of that particular initiative of school choice was Don Martin, who was the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Superintendent from 1994 to 2013 for 19 years. And he is currently County Commissioner, where he went into office in 2014. He was hired and supported by the staff and some of the people who are also still currently working in our North Carolina politics, were people who were actually sitting on our school board. It seems that our particular school board is a favorite when it comes to moving up into state government. During the around 1993, 94, the community had a support for school choice. They did support, certain communities supported school choice. It was Republican dominated school board from 1994 to 2018, and a board of county commissioners through 2020, and other nonprofit and faith organization. And also the North Carolina State had a support for school choice. General Assembly in 2010, House District 75, gerrymandered by Donnie Lambeth, who was elected to the North Carolina House in 2014. And it also understand that he used to be on our school board. So we have the atmosphere for a system that has proven to not be beneficial to all students in the last 20 years, but have not been changed. And that will require some political will for that to happen. At one time, we did have an option for school choice, and where we were broken into certain districts. So when they redid the zones, they created a District 1, and it was by using gerrymandered, that District 1 seat, 2 seats for District 1, which is the city of Winston-Salem, which has a greater population than the county of Forsyth, but the city, District 1, only holds 2 seats, and District 2 has 4 seats, which sets us up for inequality at that point as well.
Eunice, may I interject here a minute?
Yes, ma'am.
Just wanted to clarify that District 2 includes the city sections of Southwest, West, and Northwest City of Winston-Salem precincts, as well as the county precincts.
Thank you. And then in 2014, Mark Johnson, who became the superintendent for the state of North Carolina, actually started his career on the school board here in Winston-Salem. He is Republican and supported by Phil Berger. So also, I want to let everyone know that Mark Johnson is also supported by individuals who finance choice schools and choice schools, and the word is just come out of my mind, but they also support private our tax dollars going to privately held schools. So these are the type of people that we now have in control that came from Forsyth County. And Beverly Emery, who was the superintendent before Dr. Harrison, is now working with Mr. Johnson in Raleigh at the Board of Education. But in 20,
Wait a minute, Eunice, she's the Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction, second to Mark Johnson.
yes. And in 2018, we actually had our first Democratic majority school board, and also the first African-American superintendent focused on equity. Miss Harrison, or Dr. Harrison, was superintendent from 2019 to 2020 and resigned after 1 year of superintendent. And as we reflect back on the 90s, there is a lot that, like I said, that could be said about our history, the resegregation of our schools, the inequity of our schools. There's no way with the time that I was given that I could actually go over everything, but I do want to highlight some of the things that happened in the 90s, like the new choice system. Even though that it was proven that it has been proven that choice creates, say, the resegregation of schools, is something that has not been looked at since its implementation, and honestly tried to be changed. And that is something that we are trying to have done differently. Dr. Harrison did form a choice committee. I sit on that choice committee, and I look forward to the next couple of months as we have revved up that committee again, and we plan to actually look at the choice plan and look at the implementation it has on the school budget. It has been admitted that the choice plan is not sustainable as it moves forward as far as the cost of transportation. And we just want people to be honest about what exactly the choice system is doing as far as resegregating our schools. And it's just part of the plan to combat this attack that we are experiencing right now when it comes to our school district and equity in our school.
Eunice, can you
So-
go ahead and push the slides?
Yes. Any particular one you want to see, Carolyn?
I just wanted to just highlight what went on between 2000 and 2013 real quick, and then go to 2014, 2020.
Okay, with the 2006 school bond referendum, Martin and the Republican-dominated school board were able to acquire the funds to truly complete their school choice by design plan with all of the new schools placed in the county suburbs. So people often ask, why are all the schools now, new schools being built in the county instead of the city of Winston-Salem or in the urban areas? And that school bond from 2016 is one of the reasons. And by 2009, the first of these new bond funded schools in the county were opened, such as Kimmel Farms Elementary, Flat Rock Middle School, etc. Up until 2010, schools have been resegregated primarily in just Black majority versus white majority schools. And then in 2012, Martin finalized the last school assignment plan, ensuring that certain sections of the city and county either have white elite dominated student ratios, Black dominated student ratios, and Hispanic Latino dominated student ratios. And one of the examples are Easton in South Winston's Easton Elementary, Griffin Elementary, Coanoke Elementary, and Philo Middle School, which Carolyn really took up the fight and has been fighting since 2009 to make sure that equity is being considered when it comes to the Philo Middle School. And Carolyn, you can speak more about that than I can.
Well, I didn't really want to go into follow per se. I wanted to note that they flipped all of these schools as well as other schools in the school system to make them predominantly Latino dominated ratio, so that we finally had a triple segregated school system of white elite majority schools in the county, some black dominated ratio schools in Northeast and East Winston, and then in South Winston and some North Winston, you have Latino dominated ratio schools.
Correct. And in between 2014 and currently today, the Every Child Succeeds Act was initiated by President Obama. And we've had several conversations, meetings with the current superintendent at that time, Dr. Emery, concerning the changes that had to take place within our school district to qualify or mandated by the Every Student Succeeds Act. And there were many answers that we never received as far as how the school was complying to this federal act. So, and then 2016, the first major school bond referendum since 2006. And then that's when we got into the fact that Ashley was taken off the bond as for consideration, and no school funding for building Ashley was on that 2016 bond. And we've been advocating for Ashley since then, and we still have no, even though the land has been agreed upon to be purchased by the school system, the school system has yet to actually purchase the land, but there is an agreement to buy the land. So there, like I said, there was a lot in here. If anyone who is listening would like to have a copy of this, then please let the host of this webinar know, and we'll gladly give it to you, because it's always good to have some type of reference when you're looking at becoming involved in an issue that you may not have been involved before. And that way you can have some, like I said, a reference, so you can start learning on the situation. Carolyn, anything you'd like to say before I turn it back over to Kelly?
No, I mean, there's just a huge wealth of information of 26 years of the impact of school choice on our neighborhoods, on our schools, on our parents, on our teachers, on our staff, on our administrators. And we thought we were making headway when we got the first, when we finally got a Democratic majority school board with the first African-American chair and a first African-American superintendent. And we see how after just 2 years of that, there is now a huge backlash. And we cannot go backward. As Kelly keeps saying, we have to go forward.
Yeah, we got to go forward, and we definitely agree with that. Thank you, Kelly. I'll give up my share now.
Wonderful. Thank you, both Eunice and Carolyn. Before there was an Action for Equity, there was a Coalition for Equity in Public and Education, and the Big Four, and just other people who have been on the ground fighting for equity. And it is because of the work of both Eunice Campbell and Carolyn Highsmith, and honestly, all those on our panel tonight, that Action for Equity have been able to come in and to build a coalition and to do the work that we do in advocating for our children. So I just have nothing but respect for you two women. Thank you for sharing this information, and we will be sure to provide a copy of their presentation either on our website or certainly on our Facebook page. So next up, we now will hear from our panel. And I am going to turn the evening over to the president of our board and one of the co-founders of Action for Equity, Reverend Ford.
Good evening to everybody. And grateful for all of you tuning in. Sunday night, of course, is not a great night for these sorts of things, but when there's an emergency, there is an emergency, and that is what we are facing right now. Equity is under assault. The news of this past week relative to the school department made that clear. And so we hustled quickly and asked a few people to gather and join us on a panel tonight because we felt they represented the breadth and depth that we need in terms of a multiracial coalition of people who are gathered with a commitment for equity. What changes the game is when we are able to build a permanent pro-equity governing majority here in this county that is focused in on equity, that is focused in on moving forward and not taking one step back. And if there's any one thing we might need to say as the hashtag for tonight, it's that we won't go back. And so I'm honored and privileged to be able to present to you all the distinguished members of our panel this evening. Chuck Spong, who is the director of Love Out Loud and well known to many on this call, has truly come alongside and brought alongside his organization as an ally, ready to do what is needed to support the cause of equity, whether it be in our education system or whether it be in other areas of justice. Also want to welcome Dean Clifford, who has been part of the core group that has been sponsoring the Faith in the City luncheon presentation series for several years now, that has originated out of Knollwood Baptist Church, and who has also been a great ally in this work, positioned herself as such. Also glad to have with us one of our own board members, Dr. Willette Nash, who worked in the school department and will be able to speak to some of that experience, particularly reflecting on this moment that has hit us here in this past week. And she also serves as treasurer of the board for Action for Equity. She's a voice of experience as well as expertise and a real deep commitment to advocating on behalf of our children. Brother Eric Martin, one who I've had the privilege of having a number of conversations with over these 3 years that I've been in town here, who is perhaps most well known with his role with the Big Four Alumni Association, but has been deeply invested in the concerns of our community for many years, and in particular on behalf of our children. So they're all here with us tonight, and I want to welcome each and every one of them. You can find out more information about them, obviously, on the internet. I want to start out with pitching a question to Chuck Spong, and knowing the relationships that you have built over the years, particularly with many in the white community here within Forsyth County. All the shoulders that you have rubbed with so many of those who are in positions of power and privilege here in this city. What is your message to them about the importance of this moment, the importance of not going back, why we cannot even consider such a thing as bringing Don Martin back into the interim superintendency, and what the imperative is for this time that is confronting us right now?
Thank you, Reverend Ford, and to all of the panelists and Action for Equity in particular for organizing this. Certainly the last 30 minutes gives us plenty of context and should cause us all to dig down deep and say, this ought not to happen on our watch. I think there's quite a number of folks, I would even characterize myself, who grew up a certain way with a white lens, and certainly were recipients of white privilege and have lived in that culture of white supremacy, such that we knew another way. And over the past probably decade or so, I've been grateful for friends, some of them on this call and some of them from my days in Chicago, that began to come alongside me to help me begin to see just how what I had experienced as an advantage had left so many others behind. And so over the past, particularly over the past couple of years, as our district has begun to do some the beginnings of work, I would just concur with Reverend Ford. We won't go back. We can't go back. Certainly, as over the weekend and in the past week, as some movement began to surface, it felt like we might just go back. And I think there's a growing, Reverend Ford would encourage us to look for a critical mass, not necessarily a majority of folks. And I do think that there's a critical mass of folks within the white community that are, if you will, waking up to the disparities and the enormous inequities within our system, and are using their privilege and their advocacy not to take over the conversation. That's one of the main things I encourage my white friends is our role is not to come in and commandeer these things, but to come alongside of and come underneath of our friends of color, particularly our Black friends, who have been championing and leading these efforts for many years. And so I guess my response would be, I'm humbled to be in the conversation and want to lift up the arms of those who have been fighting for these things for many years, and do my part to help others begin to understand some of the complexities and the ways that we can support in productive ways.
Thank you so much, Chuck. That's a great way to get us started. And I want to follow up with you, Dean, with a similar, entry point. As an elder in our community, and particularly among some of the same folks that has been the community that Chuck has moved around. And you have known Don Martin personally for a number of years. And so I'd really like to hear from you, your perspective on the imperative of this moment, why we have to move in a different direction, and what it means to you as a person of privilege relative to so many others in our community, about advancing the cause of equity and not risking going even one step back.
Well, first, I would like to just jump right on that and say that we cannot go back. We've got to go forward. I have felt that momentum was beginning to build to finally address issues related to equity and disparities in educational achievement, and that we had the prospect of building on some of that momentum. We've seen both of our leading local foundations speaking out for equity and for education. But let me give you just a little bit of background. My first job after college was to teach, and I was teaching in North High School in 1963 to 66, when there was the barest beginning of steps toward integration. As I began my own family and had 4 children, all of our children were involved in busing. And I saw good things happening. And then as I returned to the system later as a school counselor, I saw us begin to reverse that and move into the school choice plan, which was resegregating our schools. And this was of great dismay to me. Yes, I grew up not with economic privilege, but I grew up with white privilege. And I believed firmly and continue to believe that children do best when they're in an environment that is diverse and rich with diversity and offers equity to all. I think we're at a very dangerous point. We can either go forward and build on some of the steps that have been made, or we can turn our back and say we want to return to the status quo. Years ago, I came across a quote from John Dewey: "What the best and wisest parent wants for his or her child is what the community must want for all of its children." That's been kind of my mantra. Since then, I moved from teaching at the high school level to being an elementary school counselor, and then to working on behalf of opportunities beginning at birth and in early childhood when brain development was proceeding so quickly. I do believe that we cannot, as a community, afford the kind of outcomes we're getting from our school system. I believe this is a spiritual issue, a moral issue, an ethical issue, an economic issue. It's a quality of life issue. Whatever way you want to cut it, it is ridiculous that we have so many of our children not reading proficiently at 3rd grade, not able to do math in the 8th grade, not doing well on the ACT test when they get to high school, and that is racially showing clearly that we are not serving our Black and brown children well. I honestly believe that the community, the entire community, must come together and wrap our arms around children and say, we're not going to stand for this any longer. We want a culture that values equity, excellence, and excitement in every single learning environment for every single child. So that's some of my perspective, and I'll be glad to speak more about that later.
Thank you so much, Dean. That was very helpful as we keep this conversation going. Dr. Nash, I want to bring you in here and say this as a prefatory comment. Really, it in part is a transition from the remarks we've just heard from Chuck and Dean to this. The late Dr. Carlton Eversley became my dear friend over the last 2 years of his life and 2 of my short 3 years here, reminded us publicly constantly that he had told this community all of those years ago when this school choice plan was first being designed and put in place. If you do this, it will resegregate the schools. And that lo and behold, that is what in fact had happened, because of course, educational equity and the activism around it was very dear and close to his heart. Dr. Nash, as somebody who worked in the school system for years, I wonder if you could share with us a little bit of insight from your time working in the school system, particularly as it pertains to the question at hand now, to the news of this past week, and to the assault on equity that this all represents, and perhaps even connect some of that to some of the comments that have been made from Chuck and Dean as well.
Sure, Reverend Ford, yes. And I'm going to try to summarize this in a way that is concise. As I was listening to both Chuck and Dean and listening to Kelly's opening statement, there were 3 questions I'd like for us to ponder as I close, but there are 4 dynamics that continue to drive the work that I did in the school district. And these 4 dynamics are going to be those dynamics that we will have to watch if we elect to bring Dr. Martin back. Because these 4 dynamics, in addition to the school assignment plan and the segregation that Dr. Eversley spoke about, are the dynamics that are so deeply embedded and deeply systemic in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County schools that are virtually intractable, encompassing everything that we look at, from facilities to school leadership to how teachers are assigned. We think it's just about how students are assigned, but it's how leaders are assigned to lead the instructional vision at the school. And those 4 dynamics are class, race, gender, and expectation. Throughout my whole tenure with the school district, those dynamics formed the focus of my staff development. And those are the dynamics that serve to make the gaps that we see or saw historically and presently so deeply intractable in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County schools. My concern about bringing Dr. Martin back is that he may not actively sabotage any of the equity work that is currently underway because he may not be there long enough to do it, but he won't advance it. And the best way to ensure that something dies is to ignore it. My concern is around the equity policy. My concern is around the Equity Advisory Committee. The Equity Advisory Committee is, as it has been formalized, is not new to Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. This struggle to try to transform the district so that it serves all students well is not new to Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. Action for Equity is not the first organization to try to transform Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. Change was here for years. They had an equity committee. Change did its own equity analysis of the school assignment plan, the resulting segregation of the schools, and the opportunities or the lack of opportunities for students within Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. The question is, what was done with that report? So my concern with bringing Dr. Martin back is, and this, I'm gonna raise this in a question for us to reconsider. Is he an equity leader? My answer would be no. I will give him some credit for acknowledging his responsibility as a superintendent, being responsible for the achievement of students. He did attend to that responsibility, but we are at a place now where we need to institutionalize some policies that will create equity in a very intentional way, relative to instruction, relative to expectation for students' performances and their ability to learn and how we think about children and their capacity, because the achievement gaps are clearly class-based, race-based. They were gender-based. I've been retired for 2 years now, haven't seen that data. But the last time I looked at the data, it was significant to me that our Black males at one point were underperforming our poor white males, and it didn't matter if they were affluent or not. But I don't want to stop there, because the questions that I would like to raise for us in light of the conversation about us being a community, when we talk about race and class, clearly there's a racial gap in the achievement, but we haven't talked about the class gap. Has Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools served our poor white students? And when we talk about this white rage we see currently in 2020, particularly around the followers of Donald Trump, particularly that white male rage, can we ask ourselves at this point, why do we see such a renewed emphasis on manufacturing? Winston-Salem used to be a manufacturing town, and students could drop out of high school and go to work directly to R.J. Reynolds, Haynes, and all of the other top manufacturers and make a good living. That is no longer the case, and Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools failed to educate its citizens, our poor white students, as well as our Black students. They didn't have to. They could quit school and get a job. So are we seeing that rage as the outcome of the fact that we've even failed to educate poor white students? And that was a part of the work that I did as well. I think my last question is, our poor white students here in the county who live in the outlying county areas in some of the schools that I work with, they have the same interest as our poor Black and brown kids, and even our affluent Black and brown kids, be they small in number. They have the same interest for being educated at high levels, to be prepared for an economy that is no longer manufacturing. So no, I don't think Donald Martin is exactly prepared to take us in that direction. I believe he may be more concerned with the interests around R.J. Reynolds and ensuring they get the stadium. He may not want to undo any of the work that Dr. Hairston has done, but he may not necessarily be all that passionate about advancing it either.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Nash, for framing that. Dr. Martin, I want to get you in here to ask the question, particularly as Dr. Nash brought up Black males and how acute that gap was, achievement gap between Black males and white males, even across class lines. What do you think is the biggest threat to the prospects of our Black boys and Black males, Black young men in the school system if we end up taking a step back right now?
Good evening. What I feel is the largest threat to African-American males right now, if we go backwards. If you look at the dropout data going backwards, it's not good. We had a low rate of graduation for males. One of the biggest issues I think that we have as far as, and that is modeling for African-American males in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County schools. We don't have a lot of models for them to follow. African-American models or white models. We need men to model for those students. Sometimes it happens a little on the tail end of education. Men have a tendency to want to work at the high school level. You don't have that many men at the elementary level. So some males, Black males, don't see a man until they reach middle or high school. Basically, that's not something that they see. They see females. I think that, and I know that, salary, pay scale has a lot to do with that. But if we want to change things, we have to put people in positions where young Black males can see them. Going back a long time ago, I'm 70 years old, but when I attended Kimberly Park Elementary School, there were Black males there. The female teachers very seldom dealt with discipline. If there was something that needed to be handled, they sent us to see one of those males. So I think that every elementary school needs to make a effort to enhance its male staffing, to increase the visibility for young Black and young white males to see men, somebody they can model themselves after. When I was in school, there was a gentleman by the name of Bernard Foy, and he was a band director at Paisley High School. And Mr. Foy had a thing that he said, and I've carried it with me out throughout my life, that a wise man learns from a fool's mistakes, and a fool learns from his own. So if we're foolish enough to continue to go backwards, and I think we're going backwards. I concur with Dr. Nash. We worked together about her comment about Dr. Martin. But I also had a gentleman tell me one time that you don't have to define a person. You look at the results of what they did. You look at the results of what Dr. Martin tenure was, and his tenure was low performing schools, resegregated schools. That's not his whole bio, but those are some terrible things. He did some good things, but you got to weigh them. And when I say he did it, you have a school board that's there's still those members there, although the Democrats have the majority. But look at the members that's still there. A lot of those people were there during that whole reign of resegregation, redistricting the schools. And those people are fighting to keep it like it is because they're happy with the district as it is. I just hate we lost what I thought was the best change that we had coming. I think that in 13 months, she did a great job. I think if she'd had a full term, we could have seen a whole lot. I just think, Reverend Forward, that if we get more visibility in the schools, males, that is something that young Black males need to see.
Thank you so much, Doc. And I have been learning more and more about Mr. Bernie Foy. I just had to do the eulogy for his wife, Mrs. Elsie Foy, who just passed away here in recent weeks. And so your anecdote really resonates with me, but also resonates with the larger point in terms of the importance of getting Black men in particular, but men in general, more of them into the schools. This connects, of course, directly to a conversation we could have and perhaps will pick up on relative to the school to prison pipeline and how we make progress in moving away from that and minimizing that. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I want to pick up on the last pieces that you were talking about relative to the results of Don Martin that you can speak to regardless of how one may feel about the man personally. And furthermore, your sense that those who are trying to make this move in this kind of rogue means, a rogue manner, are trying to protect things the way they are. And I want to go back to Dean and Dean, perhaps ask you to speak to this first, and then Chuck. What connection do you see between what is going on right now in this moment and this news that we saw in this past week and the concept of white lash? And do you see a connection between these two? How do you understand white lash? And is this rogue move to try to bring him back kind of on the cover of night, as I've said, without anybody knowing, is this exemplary of a coming white lash as we look to the 2022 school board elections?
Wow. Well, in the national context, I think we've seen a real white lash that I think is probably reflective of whether it's conscious or not, and I think it is often conscious, of the fear of white people that our country is changing and that people of, quote, Anglo-Saxon heritage will be in the minority in the not distant future. And, you know, power does not give up its position very easily. And so whether we're talking nationally or locally, I think those that have enjoyed the privilege of power and status, you know, are want to protect that as much as they can. But I do think we have some opportunity. We have some business leaders that are beginning to understand that that system cannot serve this community well forever, that it is a long past time for us to turn the page and acknowledge. I guess it starts, I think the very first step is acknowledging white privilege, being honest about our racist history. I personally know that I've spent the last number of years getting more and more waked up to just what our history has been and what it's meant for many people that I didn't realize. And so I do think there are people of goodwill that are getting waked up and are beginning to understand that it's time to change. But I do think we can expect people who are benefiting from the power that is to be very reluctant to give that up or to see anything change. I also think that while I personally believe that the Search Institute some years ago put out a book that said all kids are our kids, trying to really stress the fact that in a community, The children belong to all of us, and we want every child to do well. But there's always a tendency to start by saying, but I want to be sure my children do well. And so if white people start feeling like there's going to be some disequilibrium and we're going to make some changes that might bring a little discomfort, there may be pushback. I think I'm kind of wandering around there. That's why I think there needs to be a community-wide dialogue with respectful listening to each other, and why I was so dismayed, not only about Dr. Harrison's decision to leave, but about what seemed to be the school board not listening to the community and even considering taking a step backwards. It's going to take all of us working together, because I think we've got, as the opening presenters showed us, we've got 20 or 30 years of work to undo. It's going to take the kind of analysis where you take any indicator, whether it's how are kids doing when they show up for kindergarten? Well, if they're already behind then in what we expect them to know, what's the root cause of that and how are we going to fix it? And then if they're behind at third grade in their reading, how come? Why can't we fix that? How are we going to make sure that we don't just keep moving forward and not even address anything they've missed in their first few years? So it's going to take innovation, creative effort, but most of all, determination. We talk about public will or political will. We've got to build will to make these change and to resist any kind of backlash that comes.
Thank you so much, Dean. Chuck, to this last point that Dean just brought up, building this public will, and you referenced earlier the comment I've made in the past about building a critical mass of pro-equity, woke folks who are ready to move in a progressive direction that throws off the ways of plantation politics that have governed, this town locally. Are we getting there? Do you feel a sense of momentum in building that public will, even in the face of this apparent effort to move us backward? Do you see that? What is your sense?
Well, I tend to err on the naive, full of hope side. And so, I would say yes, with huge qualifications to that yes. Small yes with lots of qualifications. I guess I would characterize from my role in the community that is both, I'm an ordained minister, I lead a nonprofit, I chair the board of the Forsyth Promise, and so have been kind of in the thick of a lot of this data and work of collective impact and equity, as far as immersing myself in the dialogue. I would characterize some of what we all thought, we all tentatively hoped this summer as being very, very fragile. And so to potentially, the next move is either going to move us further into towards the work of equity, or you're right, it's going to move us back. And so this is an incredibly important crossroads. And so I agree with Dean. As I think there is some will towards making a shift here. It's certainly maybe not widespread, but there is, as to keep quoting my good friend here, a critical mass of folks that as some of that movement became public at the end of last week, we were making calls to friends to say, hey, we can't be silent, to white friends to say, we cannot be silent in this moment. Another phrase, Reverend Ford and you'll just have to forgive me for quoting him so often because he's become a hero to me. And he talks about using your privilege in subversive ways to undermine the very system that gives us privilege. And so I'd say there've been a number of us over the past couple of days that have just reached out and had conversations. I think one of the things that serves us well in this community, we have tremendous amount of things we need to address. but there is some sense of relational equity among us. Like we do, like I'm completely baffled on a national or state level, but on a local level, we know one another. Like we know each other. Like we know people in positions as dads of soccer kids and churchgoers and people we see at the grocery store. And we would do well to intentionally have conversations in this moment to do, to hold one another accountable. And that's I'm a small little part in that plan, but I've committed myself to bringing bringing others to a sense of understanding. I do think one of the as has been mentioned earlier, some of the work we've done in terms of accountability in particular and putting the disaggregated data out there has really shaken people up. They've never seen just how disparate, like when you look at school level data, just how big the gaps are. And then when you disaggregate it by gender and by class, and it's just it's unmistakable the work that we have to do. And so yeah, I think it's fragile, and I think it is on all of us to step up and to do what we can.
Could
Thank
I
you.
add to what Chuck said just a minute?
Just a
Because,
minute, Dean. Just a minute, Dean.
okay,
I do need to go on the record. I did not bring Chuck on here for him to call me a hero. And so I just want to establish that he's not here because I want him to say nice things about me. And I value him as a brother to foot. Dean, go ahead, please, and pick up on what Chuck was talking about.
well, I just think that the relational aspect of it needs to be underscored. In our coalition that came together trying to figure out how to help establish some remote learning centers, I kept hearing a similar theme. People talked about some teachers that are outstanding and that they had just had great experiences with. They talked about some principals that really get into the community and try to respond to their neighborhood. Got on the bus for the remote learning center and said to the kids, have a good day. We really want this to go well for you, etc. You keep hearing that on a relational level, we can begin to know each other and can begin to find our common humanity. It's on the systems level where power decisions are made and people are not invited to the table to participate, that things particularly fall apart. And so I'm kind of like Chuck. I guess that I always have a reservoir of hope, but I'm also realistic, because if we keep living in our bubbles and don't reach out and get to know and relate well to people who are in any way, whether it's class, race, gender, whatever, different than we are, then we're going to keep on making the same mistakes. So I just really want to underscore that, and also to say that it's imperative that what we do moving forward address the whole child and the whole family, that we've got to find ways to put our arms around families in this community and make it easier to be a strong family and to have living wages, for example, so parents don't have to work 3 jobs, etc. So all of this fits together, and that's why it's such hard work. And that's why we've got to keep caring about each other and reaching out to each other.
Thank you so much, Dean. Dr. Martin, I want to swing back to you. You hear Chuck and Dean speaking in some terms and in some ways that we have been talking about in our community for years, and really pushing this conversation and critiquing, some of their racial peers, so to speak. Having been in this community for as long as you have, is this moment different when it comes to the cause of fighting for racial equity in general, but of course, educational equity? Is this moment different? And if you see a difference, does this difference give you hope, even in the midst of this, bad news that we have been confronted with this week?
Yes, this moment is different. I see a coalition of citizens that I believe are sincere in wanting to see a change in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County schools, equitable change. I'll put it like that, not just change for change's sake, but an equitable change, a change that is going to be in the best interest of students. In the past, I think what I've seen from work, I worked at Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools for 26 years. There were a group of people that represented two separate groups. Give you a analogy. There was a group of business leaders came to a school board meeting some time ago, and they had some concerns about what we're talking about now. So this is not a new horse we're riding. We're just getting on it again. And these were business leaders, R.J. Reynolds, Sarah Lee, a lot of the leading businesses in Winston-Salem. And the approach to the school board was, at that time, we had one African-American on the school board, Buford Bailey. And their approach was from sitting in the audience, looking at the panel, that the perception that you represent all children, your perception does not give that. Well, the school board chair at that time, and it was a group of ministers, black and white also, that approached the school board. But their concern, the chairman's response was an arrogant response, because his response to the ministers and the business leaders was, we're not going to let you preach to us about integration or the racial makeup or anything, due to the fact that churches are probably more segregated on Sunday than at any time, anywhere, or any place. So when you have a mindset like that, and you have a group of people that is what you call your board, your governance, that governs the decisions that your school board makes. This is the one thing that we as citizens, our hearts can get right, but we got to put people on the school board who we need to replace people. That's why bringing Don Martin back, the past, Dr. Simonton, the past, you know, all of those people. And you just think about all the people on the school board that was there during his reign and made all these decisions and did all these things. So what we're going to have to do is, I'm also a military guy. I'm a Vietnam veteran. You might lose a little ground, but you don't lose the war. You might lose a battle, but you keep focused on the war, the overall picture. That's what we have to do right now. It's not like Dean Clifford says, it's not going to be easy. You're going up against a powerful group of people, and they're not going to relinquish this thing. So our strategies are going to have to be, we can sit at the table, we can do some things. I'm what you call a radical, but not a outright radical person. I'm one that says, if withdrawing your students, your children from the school district until they're willing to sit down and listen to you and take us to court. I got a 5-year-old grandbaby getting ready to go to the public schools. But if they're not going to listen to us and they're going to just keep on backhanding us, we have the tools. Because if no kids show up, guess what? They don't get no funding after 10 days. After 10 days, they got the money. But at the beginning of the school year, if we don't send no kids there for 10 days, they might get court orders and everything else. But if that is a way for us to really be radical and get their attention. Measures like that, and that might be too extreme. But this group of people, when I was in school, I went to school, frankly, you all, before integration took place. I never went to integrated public schools in Winston-Salem. So I had a ball, got a good education. But right now, we're fighting for a group of youth, just like Ms. Nash say, poor whites and poor blacks. We have got to, because the privilege in this town is getting an education. Just look around. And as far as and I'll make this the last thing I say, as far as the school board makeup, there's some things that we need to consider. Equity. The school board does not represent equity. If we're gonna have a 9-member panel on the school board, we need more than 2 inner city school board members. We need to lobby that the inner city gets equal representation on the school board. See, we'll never get what we want in the inner city as far as equity goes, because those people coming from the outer limits, the county and everything, they're gonna always outvote. They're gonna vote them down. Right now you got 2, so they don't have to go along with them. I mean, you know, majority rule. So I would just say we got a hard road ahead of us, but he who perseveres to the end wins the battle.
That's correct. Dr. Nash, what do we do about this school board? Did this school board make it easier or harder for Dr. Hairston to accomplish some of the moves that she was trying to make? And if your sense is that they made it harder, what do we do about this school board, and how do we influence the process by which our community selects school board members in such a way that we don't set up that sort of incongruency ever again?
Several questions. That's like kind of like a twofold question. The current school board definitely made Dr. Hairston's job difficult. If you saw the journal article, either yesterday or today, the focus was on just around the multiple decisions that have been made relative to the return of in-person instruction. And there was a comment about the school board's dysfunctional dynamic. We need a strong school board with people who really understand what leadership means. I do not know how much more difficult it would have been for Dr. Hairston. She only stayed for a year. I'm controlling for COVID. The job itself is difficult. When you have to lead a 55,000 student school board, you have every single dynamic that comes along with that. You have the students, you have the parents, you have employees, you have resources, you have buildings, you have equipment, you have decision making. And I believe, I'm not sure because I'm retired, she put the best people around her to help her with that decision-making process. She didn't have to do it alone. I sense that she understood that she had a grave responsibility, and she was an achievement-oriented superintendent. Rarely do I hear this school board talk about achievement. If your children, and Dean talked about it herself, if your children are doing well, why do you need to talk about any other children's achievement? Because that's their problem. I heard it over and over again. Well, that's their problem. The problem is their communities. The problem is their parents. The problem is they don't care. The problem is they work 2 or 3 jobs. Even that's problematic. The problem is they don't want to learn. If your children are doing well, why do you need to advocate for any other children? This board does not also consider that Yeah, District 1 might be an inner city district, but what about all those Black children that are out in the areas of affluence? They're not doing well either. So this board rarely talks about achievement. I find it interesting that we will focus on the stadium for R.J. Reynolds. I thought about this for a long time. What did R.J. Reynolds build when that high school was built? That school was not focusing on athletics. The history of that school was on developing the future leaders for the male white supremacist pipeline that is so systemic in this society, this nation, and locally. They were focused on educating their children for governance and leadership in the society to come. They decided to build an auditorium. So now I find it so interesting that we're now calling a stadium an equity issue. Why would a stadium be an equity issue? And who are the children that need the equity? I want somebody to answer that question for me. We know who we're talking about. We're talking about Black children for whom they put on an athletic track and not an academic track. Rarely are we having conversations about the fact that the third grade children cannot read. Rarely are we talking about the fact that that is what we now use as a measure to determine how we're going to build prisons, whether or not a third grader can read. Rarely are we talking about the fact that pre-K, African-American male pre-K students are now in the school to prison pipeline. Rarely are we talking about the numbers of Title I schools we have and that they're all failing schools. And rarely is that board strategizing around policy that can impact instruction and liberate a superintendent to be the instructional leader that they are. So I want this board to begin to talk about achievement. Okay, so yeah, can we have some achievement-minded board members? Perhaps it is time to begin to talk about changing district lines to acknowledge that Black and brown children are throughout the entire district. And when you dig down into the data, they are not doing well, irrespective of what school they're in. So yes, I kind of think we need an achievement-minded board that will seek to hire a premier instructional leader who understands that the superintendent's responsibility is to raise achievement in this district. It has been neglected for a very long time.
Thank you, Dr. Nash. Chuck, how do we deal with the white male supremacist pipeline? What are we going to do about that?
You're gonna toss that to me?
Of course I am.
Call it out. I mean, we'll start there. We've just got to call it out at every turn. And I think that's part of the problem is as you all, as has been stated well over this summer of reckoning, not that we have fully by any means reckoned, but I think at least a small but growing number of people understand that our silence has been complicity. And so we can't afford to just kind of fade into the background on these conversations. And so there are some that are pushing into versus kind of fading into the background. And I think that's a place to start. It's certainly not, doesn't, I mean, there's, I mean, I'm struck, I appreciated Dr. Nash's particular comment about, you know, I'm a relational guy, but of course, policy really codifies these things we talk about. And so when Dr. Nash mentioned that we've got to institutionalize these things we hold important, I'm sure there's work to be done that provides equity, in that particular framework. But yeah, calling it out first, and then moving towards policies that make that framework more embedded and in the, you know, and reconcile the system.
Okay.
Reverend Ford, may I say something to that question that you asked, Reverend Spong?
Yes, Doc, go ahead.
When we talk about systemic dynamics and when we really talk about public education, if we study the history of public education, and I alluded to it with the Reynolds example, the history of public education in the United States is a history of preparing white men, affluent and later on poor white men, for leadership and governance over the masses. And that was people of color and poor whites who they deemed, not able to or having the capacity to be able to access the benefits of that education, which was high level. The rest of the students in public education were being prepared to support that hierarchy. So they were being prepared for those roles that were at the lower end of the hierarchy. So your question around white male supremacy is the question that is deeply embedded in public education, and it comes out in tracking. It comes out in the school assignment plan. It comes out in the course access. Why are the gifted courses predominantly white? Why are there high fees or significant fees to access those tests, which will designate you as gifted? Why does that pipeline, why does that tracking exist? Why do we see a push for a stadium pushing our Black males into athletics at the expense of academics? Because the fundamental assumption is that they are not necessarily, or do they have the capacity or the skills for leadership and governance? So it's that system that we've got to overturn. So when we talk about the equity policy, we're talking about access to gifted courses, gateway courses, high-level courses that will put poor Black and brown children on that path for leadership and governance versus that path for subjugation and supporting the privileged.
Thank you so much, Doc. And that's a perfect segue as we come to a conclusion on this panel conversation, being mindful of the time. But Dr. Nash essentially just articulated and expressed what a remaking of this system would look like, what equity as the prevailing policy, the prevailing sentiment of how school was being done would look like. And so I'd like to ask each of our remaining remaining panelists to speak to that as well. What will it look like when we have accomplished what we are trying to achieve? What will our schools look like? What will the focus be? And how will that manifest itself in the lives of our children? Dr. Martin, I want to start with you, and then we'll go around to Dean and Chuck.
Okay. I envision, well, let me qualify something. I'm working with the Boston Thurman Community Engagement Roundtable on the revitalization of the Boston community. What I envision is a statement by the purpose-built community, and that is from cradle to college. I envision one day that we will have a school district that takes kids from the cradle all the way to college. I think that is a successful model. There's data that supports how to do it. It has been done. It is being done, and I think it's something that we could do here It's a matter of the will to do it. So I actually envision one day us having cradle to college education in Forsyth County Schools.
Thank you very much, Doctor. It's excellent. And it speaks to the whole child, whole family policy pieces that we have been starting to talk about out of the Platform of Action for Equity and elsewhere, connecting to some of the very work you're looking to do there and have been doing in Boston Thurman. Want to go to you, Dean, and then Chuck very briefly as we bring this panel to a close.
Dean, you're on mute.
Sorry, I would like for any child that walks into a school to feel absolutely welcome, because they see not only in the teachers, but in the featured heroes on the wall and the books that are being read and the discussions that are being held. They see and hear people like themselves. They are being told from the beginning, you too can be one of these heroes and achievers. I think that means that we have to focus on making sure that excellent, exciting instruction is available for every child. I recently heard Dr. Darity from, I think he's at Duke, talking about we should open the doors to gifted, to honors, to AP classes, and then give the support to every student to achieve in that higher level of instruction. I think we need to focus on ways to discover and call forth the individual talent and abilities of every child that's been given to them by God. I think that if we are achieving our goal, we will eventually see racial-based disparities disappear. And we will see that the numbers of kids that are participating in AP classes and going on to college breaks down those same disparities and barriers. But I also think that it requires a lot of advocacy on a higher level to say we need to attract the very best and brightest people as we possibly can into the teaching profession, and give them the kind of support and environment to achieve well. We need to call out bias when it occurs, whether it's unconscious or not, and help, because I think most teachers go into the profession wanting to do well, and I think we need to help them do that. I'm rambling. That's some of my thoughts.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Reverend Ford.
No, Chuck, it's you. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, I would concur. Cherie Fowler is another one of my heroes, and in the early work of the Community Education Collaborative, or whatever we call the CEC, that grew into the Forsyth Promise, just like Dr. Martin has just lifted up. There was that same phrase of every child thriving from cradle, and at that point we were saying to career. That really, and another friend of mine recently has talked about widespread flourishing for the whole community. So that's what it looks like to me. I think an aspect of how we get there is just a diverse coalition of people. And that's some of what needs to go on. I've seen in some of the comments of, well, what's the action plan? Well, I think part of the action plan is the coalition. It is folks coming together, rolling up their sleeves day in and day out, pressing towards this and strive together. The collective impact organization we're part of, it talks about equity isn't something we have over here as a side topic. Equity must be threaded through every part of our discussions in these kind of arenas. And I think that's something we've got to constantly lift up. There is a recent workshop I got to attend that had the title of Equity by Design, Dismantling Power Constructs for Inclusive Co-Creation. How could our tables that work on this kind of design be representative of all the stakeholders, not just the white, male white supremacist pipeline folks, or the folks of privilege, or the folks of certain class, but that truly represents the community. I think the work also becomes a part of what is manifest. In other words, how we do our work is completely germane to the outcome that we want. And so I would pray that we would invite the right folks around the table, empower those voices, give agency to those voices, and listen to one another in ways that would advance us as a community.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Dr. Martin, Dr. Nash, Chuck, and Dean. This has been extraordinary conversation because of the insights that you brought. As has been reflected in the comment lines, all of you are reflective of the sort of mindset that we need to permeate the consciousness of the community, because it is a sort of mindset that needs to take over this school board in order to be a support to future pro-equity superintendents and not a hindrance, and in order to advance the cause of equity district-wide and county-wide. So I want to again thank all four of you for taking the time tonight, and want to encourage all of those who are watching this on Facebook or who have been watching it through Zoom, who would like to dialogue more individually with any or all of these individuals, to reach out to them, and we can certainly help make that connection. With that, I'm going to turn things back over to our fearless leader, Kelly P. Easton, who is going to bring us towards our wrap-up point.
Yes, thank you. And what a wonderful panel. Thank you just for all of your advocacy and the work that you have done throughout the years to make our community a better place, and certainly our education system, one that serves all students. So there are a lot of questions in regards to what's the plan. As our board member, Dr. Ed Bell says, there are no silver bullets in this work. There's not one thing that needs to be done. There are multiple things that need to be done. And one of the main ways for us to be able to achieve a plan that is going to affect change and be able to produce better outcomes is one by organizing. So we cannot stress the importance of coalition building, as Chuck had mentioned earlier. You know, it takes people who have a background in education, such as Dr. Nash and Eric Martin and Dean Clifford. It takes people who have an understanding of the different functionalities of our community and the assets in our community, such as Chuck Spong. It takes people who have an understanding of the history, such as the Big Four, as well as the Coalition for Equity in Public Education, which we heard from Carolyn Highsmith. And then just the ongoing fight to achieve advancement, which we heard from Eunice Campbell, who is the education chair for the NAACP. So it's going to take all of us coming together, working together, bringing the assets, the things that we have. I like to say, you know, there's no little, there isn't too much. Bring what you have to the table, and you can learn more about all of these organizations by visiting online. I would certainly encourage everyone to visit equityforsyth.com. That is a coalition. Well, I would say that, there are a few of the anchors would be Action for Equity, as well as Faith in the City, which is convened by Knollwood Baptist Church, as well as Love Out Loud. But please visit the coalition. We also ask for you to visit our website, actionforequityws.org. On there, you will find information about our policies. We are here for systems change. This system does not work for many of our children, and we're here to work towards changing it. So the best way to do that is through policy. Policies is what it provides the infrastructure to the system, and we know that the decisions that are being made are what continues to drive the outcomes that we're seeking. So we're looking to make sure that the decisions that are being made are rooted in equity, rooted in the understanding of achievement, as Dr. Nash mentioned. And again, it's going to take all of us to fight this fight. The main systems change policy that Action for Equity is pushing is for the whole child education. It is the whole school, whole community, whole child policy. And it takes into account the child's complete life, including not only what that child is experiencing in their classroom, but also what that child experienced in their communities, what that child experienced in their home. And more importantly, it also includes the social, emotional well-being of that child, as well as the educators who are there to educate and develop the children in our classrooms. So with that being said, I'm now going to bring on Emily Shutt. Emily Shutt is the Secretary for Action for Equity, and she will close us out.
Thank you, Kelly, our fearless leader. I feel like she wrapped it up nicely, but if you want to find us on Facebook and join us, thank you all who when we put out the call in the last week to about Don Martin possibly coming back as interim, we heard that 1,000 emails were sent and hundreds of phone calls were made. So this is the critical mass that we need. It is building, and we need to continue to cultivate this mass and to grow the political will to make lasting systemic change. And if you check out our website, Action for Equity, ws.org, there you can donate to our work, and you can donate specifically to a remote learning mutual aid fund where we are supporting grassroots efforts to help people on the ground, helping our students now in our current remote learning environment. In closing, Action for Equity desires Forsyth County to have a community culture where educational equity proudly prevails, but we know for this vision to become a reality, we need to disrupt the status quo and reimagine our educational system. Our current system was designed for my white children to be centered and to succeed, and I must broaden my lens and critically examine the privileges and opportunities my kids have and continually grapple with how success and achievement are defined. While I want my own children to thrive, I want all children to thrive. And I don't believe that has to be mutually exclusive. As Dr. Nash said, all students have an interest in being educated at high levels, and shouldn't we as a community want that too? And what does that really mean? Could you join us in imagining how beautiful our community would be if every child has what they need to not only survive, but to flourish? And then let's continue on in the legacy of the hard work of making this dream a reality. As Dr. Ibram Kendi said, the way you fight for your child is to fight for what's best for the community of children. So let's move forward together for the community of our children here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. Thank you and good night. Unless anybody has anything.